The biggest lie ever told in modern economics is that financial crises are accidents, random acts of God, or the result of simple incompetence. I have spent over 20 years studying the flow of power, debt, and currency, and I can tell you the truth is far darker. The crisis is the design. Every major economic collapse, every currency devaluation, every revolution that overturned a monarchy or a republic was a planned wealth transfer. The system is engineered for the flow of profit and power to move upward, and the elites who profit from the chaos are the only ones who see the patterns coming until it is too late for everyone else. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It is the cold, mathematical reality of the six-stage revolution cycle. This immutable pattern, written in the blood of empires, proves that power does not fall because of external enemies. It collapses because the leaders, the financial and political elites, become so detached and so convinced of their own exceptionalism that they ignore the historical checklist. The same forces that tore apart the opulent Kingdom of France in 1789, leading to the Reign of Terror and the beheading of its king, are active right now. The same devastating political polarization that drove Spain into a brutal civil war in 1936 is what defines American politics today. The historical pattern does not care about your flag or your ideology. It is a formula. And according to the data, the United States is not approaching a civil crisis. It is firmly locked inside stage 4, the point where the system loses its legitimacy. The next two stages are not theoretical possibilities. They are a script written in blood, and it is time for you to understand how to read it. The most common mistake amateur historians make is assuming that revolutions are caused by the abject poor, the starving masses with nothing to lose. History proves this wrong. If poverty alone sparked collapse, the poorest nations on earth would be in a state of constant, violent revolution. The mechanism is far more insidious. Revolutions begin when a society has experienced a period of rising expectations, a belief in a better tomorrow, the promise of the American dream, perhaps, and then the system suddenly ceases to deliver. This is the expectation gap. It is not the peasants with no land who start the terror. It is the educated, upwardly mobile middle class who suddenly realize their hard work no longer guarantees security. In the 18th century France, it was not the serfs who marched on the Bastille. It was the lawyers, the shopkeepers, and the landowners. They become what historians call the disappointed middle. When they look up at the elite, they see Congress and Wall Street getting perpetually richer, while their own purchasing power, retirement savings, and home equity evaporate. The social contract, the unwritten agreement that effort equals reward, is officially broken. The debt cycles, the inflation, and the wars serve only to widen this gap. The moment the middle class loses faith in the system's ability to self-correct peacefully, the transition from stage 3, intellectual desertion, to stage 4, loss of legitimacy, is complete. That is the point of no return for any republic. When you set the collapse of France, the civil war in Spain, and the fall of the Russian Empire on the same timeline, you see the terrifying consistency of history. It is not chaos, it is a fixed process. The names of the leaders change, but the sequence remains the same. This is the six-stage sequence every revolution and every Republican collapse follows. Let us examine the map of destruction. Stage 1. Extreme wealth, inequality, and elite detachment. The gap between the rulers and the ruled becomes visible and insulting. Stage 2. Government incompetence and financial crisis. The state loses the capacity to solve core economic problems. Stage 3. Intellectual desertion. The educated middle class, the people who should support the system, turn against it. Stage 4. Loss of legitimacy. Citizens lose faith in elections, courts, and institutions. This is the point of no return. Stage 5. Rise of extremist factions. Organized groups gain mass support by promising to destroy the existing order. Stage 6. Violent collapse and reign of terror. The old government is overthrown, and chaos follows. This cycle doesn't care about ideology. It is a universal law of power and debt. Now, let's see how this inevitable pattern unfolded in the mother of all modern revolutions, France. Let us begin with the mother of all modern revolutions, France, in the year 1789. In the 1780s, France was the center of European civilization. Paris was the cultural capital of the world. The monarchy had ruled for 800 years. It seemed eternal, unshakable. But beneath the surface, the rot was total. This is stage 1 of every revolution. Extreme wealth, inequality, and elite detachment. France's 27 million people were divided into 3 estates. The clergy and the nobility, who made up only 1.5% of the population, owned 35% of the land and paid almost no taxes. Meanwhile, the 98.5%, the peasants, workers, and middle class carried the entire tax burden. The nobility also held ancient privileges, demanding labor and hunting on peasant land. By 1788, a bad harvest caused bread prices to spike, consuming 88% of a peasant's budget. But the elites were completely disconnected from this reality, still throwing lavish parties at Versailles. The gap was visible and insulting. This led directly into stage 2, government incompetence and financial crisis. King Louis XVI was weak and indecisive. France was bankrupt from fighting wars, including helping America in the Revolutionary War. The government owed billions. Louis' only solution was to borrow more and raise taxes on the peasants. Crucially, the nobility and the clergy refused to pay taxes or allow reforms. They would rather see the country burn than give up their privileges. By 1789, the government could not pay its debts, and the people could not afford food. The final piece was stage 3, intellectual desertion and middle-class radicalization. Louis called the Estates General, hoping to legitimize new taxes. Instead, the educated middle class, the lawyers, merchants, and thinkers demanded equal representation. Louis refused, clinging to the old power structure. On June 17, 1789, the Third Estate declared itself the National Assembly. This is the moment when the people who should be supporting the system turn against it. Less than a month later, Parisians stormed the Bastille prison. The revolution had begun. The system was over. Not because of a riot, but because the educated deemed the government illegitimate. If the French Revolution serves as the blueprint for Stage 1 and Stage 2 collapse the failure of monarchy and finance, then the Spanish Civil War of 1936 serves as the perfect mirror for a modern democratic republic, tearing itself apart. Spain had endured years of political instability, economic stagnation, and profound Stage 1 inequality, where land ownership was concentrated in the hands of a few elites. The critical phase began with Stage 4, loss of legitimacy in institutions. The Spanish Republic was not run by a king, it was run by democracy, complete with elections and a parliament. However, society was fundamentally split between two opposing visions: the Republican left, liberals, socialists, anarchists, and the nationalist right military, traditionalists, fascists. The pivotal moment came with the general election of 1936. Both sides believed that the other, if victorious, would implement a radical agenda that would destroy the nation's identity and future. The contest was razor thin, but the left won. The right immediately cried, fraud and conspiracy. The polarization trap was sprung. Voting itself became an act of war. When your political opponent is no longer viewed as merely misguided, but as an existential threat to your way of life, democracy ceases to be a mechanism for compromise and becomes a zero-sum game. This immediately escalated into Stage 5, rise of extremist factions. The military, led by General Francisco Franco, refused to accept the election results and launched a coup, triggering the Civil War. The political moderates who had tried to broker peace were instantly sidelined, and the fight was taken over by the most radical elements on both sides. Spain descended into a 3-year ideological bloodbath. Stage 6. Violent collapse and reign of terror resulted in the deaths of over 500,000 people, political purges, and the eventual dissolution of the Republic. The chaos did not deliver peace or democracy. It delivered a 40-year dictatorship under Franco. The lesson of Spain is stark. When a nation reaches Stage 4 polarization, where the integrity of shared institutions like elections, courts, and the press is completely fractured, the only outcome history has left is violence. The country fractures into two opposing realities, waiting for a spark. We have seen the slow, insulting buildup of inequality in France and the violent political polarization in Spain. Now, we must study the final lesson, the terrifying speed at which a seemingly eternal empire can dissolve once it enters Stage 5. In the early 1900s, the Russian Empire, ruled by Tsar Nicholas II, spanned 11 time zones. It had endured for over 3 centuries. Outsiders, and even the Tsar's own elites, believed the system was too vast, too deeply rooted to ever truly fall. This belief in one's own exceptionalism is a hallmark of a regime about to collapse. But beneath the imperial veneer, the nation was already deep in Stage 2 and Stage 3. The financial crisis was caused by massive, unfunded war debt from the First World War. The government's incompetence was revealed by catastrophic military losses and its inability to solve simple logistics like getting bread and coal to the capital, Petrograd. The peasants and soldiers were starving, but the Tsarist government was paralyzed. The pivotal moment arrived in February 1917. A women's march demanding bread quickly escalated into a political protest, When the Tsar ordered the army to shoot the protesters, the soldiers who were themselves starving peasants refused to obey. This single act of disobedience signaled the complete breakdown of the state's monopoly on violence, marking the fatal slide into Stage 4, loss of legitimacy. The Tsar abdicated days later. The 300-year-old Romanov dynasty dissolved like mist. The vacuum was filled by a liberal provisional government, the moderate reformers who believed they could stabilize the economy and implement democratic reform. They were educated, well-meaning, and entirely too slow. They represented the old system trying to repair itself with new clothes. This weakness created the ideal conditions for Stage 5, the rise of extremist factions. Enter the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin. The Bolsheviks offered no compromise, no complex economic theories. They offered three simple, radical promises that appealed directly to the masses and the soldiers: peace, land, and bread. While the provisional government debated constitutional reform, the Bolsheviks seized control of the Petrograd Soviet, systematically neutralizing moderate authority. The ultimate lesson of Russia is this: the collapse from Stage 4 to the violent terror of Stage 6, the Civil War, takes a matter of months, not years. Once the public loses faith in all institutions, and once a disciplined, radical faction emerges that promises a total, violent cleanup of the entire system, the collapse is almost instantaneous. When the system cracks, it shatters. The slow rot of Stage 1 through 4 only prepares the brittle structure for the final, sudden explosion of Stage 5 and 6. 3 revolutions, 3 nations, 3 centuries. We have dissected the slow, maddening rot of France, the fatal political split of Spain, and the lightning collapse of Russia. Different contexts, different ideologies, but the exact same 6-stage pattern. The overwhelming lesson is the absolute blindness of the ruling class. Every time, the people in power never saw it coming. They thought they were untouchable. They thought the system was too strong to fall. They were wrong every single time. They believed the cycle applied only to their predecessors, never to their own exceptional republic. The cycle is not a moral judge. It is an unforgiving law of physics. It proves that the revolution never delivers what it promises. It delivers blood, purges, and new tyranny. The moderates who initiate the change are executed or exiled, and the extremists who promise the most destruction take over. Chaos is the price paid for failing to reform when reform was still possible. The pattern won in France, the pattern won in Spain, the pattern won in Russia. 3 times it happened. Each time they thought they were different. Each time the pattern won. Now, for the inevitable question, the one history demands we answer. Is America currently immune to the fate of France, Spain, and Russia? The pattern says no. The data says no. The anger says no. Every warning sign is flashing red. Let us run the American Republic through the 6-stage checklist, remembering that the pattern does not care about American exceptionalism. Stage 1: extreme wealth, inequality, and elite detachment. Check. In 1980, the top 1% in America controlled 8% of wealth. Today, they control 32%. This gap is larger than France in 1789. The top 0.1% of households, roughly 130,000 families, own more wealth than the bottom 90%. While billionaires enjoy private jets and space tourism, the middle class cannot afford homes or healthcare. The rage is justified, and it is building. Stage 2: government incompetence and financial crisis. Check. The debt is $36 trillion and climbing. Trust in Congress is at a mere 15%. Lobbyists write legislation, corporations own politicians, and the government serves donors, not the people. Problems that should be solved are ignored because the system exists to serve the elites. When both parties are seen as corrupt and incompetent, faith in democracy dies. Stage 3: intellectual desertion and middle-class radicalization. Check. The educated middle class is being hollowed out. College is unaffordable. Housing is unaffordable. Young, educated people are drowning in student debt and failing to achieve what their parents had. They are angry, and they are looking for someone to blame. The billionaires, the system. When the lawyers, the teachers, and the engineers, the people who should be succeeding, start failing, they radicalize. This is exactly how the French Revolution began. Stage 4: loss of legitimacy in institutions. Check. We are here right now. This is the crucial stage where the polarization trap of Spain is activated. Trust in the media, the police, and the entire electoral process is broken. Half the country believes the 2020 election was stolen. The other half believes the January 6th incident was a coup attempt. Everything is seen through a partisan lens, from the courts to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. When people stop believing in shared institutions, the country is no longer united. It is two nations occupying the same territory, waiting for a spark. The kindling is dry. Whether the trigger is a contested election, a political assassination, or an economic crash, the structural conditions for Stage 5 are complete. History says Stage 5 and 6 come fast. We have established that the United States is locked inside Stage 4, the loss of legitimacy. History confirms that once this threshold is crossed, the final stages come fast, often taking mere months to transition from widespread distrust to outright terror. If the pattern holds, Stage 5, revolutionary movement gains mass support, is the immediate next step. We see the pieces forming now. On the left, there is growing support for radical socialist policies and wealth redistribution. On the right, there is a growing demand for authoritarianism and strongman leaders. Both sides increasingly believe that the system is broken beyond reform, that it needs to be torn down and rebuilt. When the moderates lose control and the extremes gain mass support, Stage 5 is here. Then comes Stage 6, violent collapse and reign of terror. This is what no one wants to think about, but history provides the terrifying clues. In France, it meant 40,000 executed in the terror. In Russia, it meant 10 million dead in civil war. American exceptionalism says it cannot happen here. But that is what they said in France and Russia. What would an American Stage 6 look like? History suggests organized violence and insurgency, not just riots. The military and police could fracture, with units siding either with the government or with revolutionaries. We would see complete supply chain breakdowns, leading to food and fuel shortages. States could try to secede or refuse to recognize federal authority. Foreign powers China and Russia would interfere, hoping to see America burn. The outcome won't be the America we knew. It could be authoritarian, fractured into regional zones, or something far worse. The collapse is not always a sudden explosion. It is often the rapid, brutal consequence of years of structural failure. The pattern is clear. Once you are in Stage 4, it is very difficult to stop 3 revolutions, 3 identical patterns: France, Spain, Russia. Each time the elites thought they were safe, each time they thought the peasants would never rise. And each time the gap between rich and poor, the government corruption, and the loss of faith all combined into an explosion that destroyed the existing order. The structural rot in the United States is complete. The wealth gap is worse than France in 1789. The political fracture is as broken as Spain in 1936. The pattern says Stage 5 is coming. Maybe we can reform before revolution. Maybe the system can fix itself. But the pattern, the cold mathematics of history, says otherwise. The time for hopeful moderation is over. The time for clear-eyed preparation has begun. The only defense is awareness. If this analysis opened your eyes to where we actually are in the cycle, subscribe. Because when Stage 5 begins, when the revolutionary movements gain mass support, you will want to understand what is happening and why. The answers are not hiding in the future. They are written in the past.